SWB audio capture, not registered.
Microphone check.
Diet Coke, I got you.
That's better. There's a little feedback.
That's what I couldn't figure out. Yes, I'm still learning all the technical
They're about ready.
We're live.
Test, 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 test. Test. I'm hearing the slightest of hum. That was better. So now, now I'm without sound. I don't, am I good? Can you hear me? Okay, great. Yeah, great. Cool.
Oh, sorry, still there. Yes, we should find the microphone. Yep, I think I need to go there. But yes, thank you for taking my call. Thank you
Not so much with that.
Hi, everybody. We're about to get this evening started. So if you could go ahead and have a seat. If you have a blanket and you're in the back, if you could bring your blanket to the front, that'll be great. We are trying to make sure that we are filling the yard out this evening. So if you have a blanket, please try to bring it to the front. And if you're standing on a seat, go ahead and have that seat.
Hey, everyone. I'm Lisa Gilbert with Public Citizen, and I am thrilled to welcome everyone to tonight's event. So we are joining thousands of other people organizing at over 100 events nationwide to watch the bipartisan January 6th Select Committee's first hearing. And after receiving 140,000 documents, issuing more than 7 dozen subpoenas, and taking roughly 1,000 depositions in the Select Committee is ready to share the results of its rigorous investigation with the American people. These hearings are going to help us understand not only the violent activities on January 6th, but what led up to that terrible day and then what happened in its wake. And really, regardless of political party affiliation, anyone who cares about the future of our country should tune in tonight. And we are gathering tonight to make clear to MAGA Republicans' attacks that they are attacking our elections and our democracy, and it is not flying under the radar. We all get that this is an ongoing criminal conspiracy that has been unfolding for more than a year. It's not just another blip in the media cycle. It is a top story. It's a story of the fragility of our democracy and the ongoing threats to its integrity that we all see. So we are gathering tonight because we want to make sure that we prevent future plots from undermining our elections. And we are gathering tonight to witness to new evidence, as well as to just sit in solidarity as we have to witness the reliving of this insurrection. And finally, we are gathering tonight to make sure that those in power understand the interest and the attention from all of us in the findings and also what the next steps will be that follow on. And those next steps are critical because every day that Trump and his enablers escape accountability is a day that the forces trying to tear down our democracy get stronger. And it's clear that the public simply won't stand for it. And that's why you're all here. So with that, I want to thank the folks in the 150 organization Not Above the Law Coalition that organize these events nationwide and get us right into our pre-hearing programming. We're going to start with pre-taped remarks from Rob Reiner, renowned actor, TV and screenwriter, director, and activist. So let's turn to the video.
Hi, I'm Rob Reiner. On January 6, 2020, violent mob led by a president who had lost an election and was desperate to hang on to power attacked the U.S. Capitol to prevent the legal counting of votes and the peaceful transfer of power. Pure and simple, this was an attack on the United States government. Shortly after the attack, the House of Representatives formed a bipartisan committee to find out exactly what happened on January 6th. And this Thursday, after an exhaustive investigation, they will present their findings to the American public, and I urge everyone to watch. If you care about the preservation of our democracy, about the ability to form a more perfect union, it is critical that you watch. So please, please watch.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Kelsye Adams, Program Director at DC Vote. In addition to the 400 years of inequality for Black and Brown people, for over 200 years, the citizens of DC have been denied representation. Under our nation's capital, we were told that this space was a space for protection for the Capitol. Our nation continues to be under attack. Our democracy is under attack. January 6th made that clear. One of the original forms of voter suppression still is present today as well here in DC. The people of DC restored safety in our nation's capital on January 6th. However, my neighbors, myself, community does not have a voice in our nation's Congress. Hashtag DC statehood. Hashtag January 6th justice. I would like to introduce tonight's panel's moderator, Allison. Ashley is the CEO of Turner Connolly Group, a CNN commentator, Harvard Institute of Politics fellow, and a former Obama White House official. She helped lead the movement in 2020 to ensure that every vote was counted in that election. Let's give her a very warm DC welcome.
Good evening. I am so happy to be here.
you're in DC, so you know all this pollen flying in the air. Have a little congested, but I could not think of a better place to be than in community, because watch the tragic events of January in isolation because of the pandemic. And so it's nice to have turned the page on that issue, even though we're still fighting COVID, but to be able to be here in community and hold space with one another. Because the incidents on January 6th were not a surprise, but can never happen again. And so these hearings are one step to ensure that the people who were the perpetrators and tried will not get to do that again, and that they will be held accountable. So thank you for being here. I'm gonna get right into the panel. We have some great speakers, because I know when the hearing starts, the last person you want to be hearing from is me. So let's get going. So our first panel is with Norm Eisen and Elizabeth Wydra. Norm is an American attorney, author, and former diplomat. He is a senior fellow in governance study at the Brookings Institute, a fellow CNN legal analyst with myself, and the co-founder and the executive chair of the States United Democracy Center. Welcome, Norm. And Elizabeth Wydra is the president of the Constitutional Accountability Center and their previous chief counsel, representing the center as well as clients, including constitutional scholars and historians, state and local organizations, groups such as the League of Women Voters and AARP. So Elizabeth, welcome to the stage also. So we're gonna be passing the mic back and forth, but I wanna jump right in. Elizabeth, I wanna start with you. It's been over a year since, just right behind us, and so much has happened since that day. Some good and some not good. So, big moment with the January 6th committee. It's about to hold its first public hearing, and many, many months have gone. And some of these, if you aren't watching the news every single day, which the average American doesn't have the luxury of doing, some of them might not be in the public eye and have an understanding. So can you kind of give us a summary of what's been happening with the January 6th Select Committee up to this point?
Yeah, thank you.
Just use this.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here tonight. So that is an excellent question, because so much of what the committee, this bipartisan committee, has been doing has been behind the scenes, because they're taking this ongoing assault on the freedom to vote extremely seriously. And this bipartisan committee has been meticulously going through the evidence to learn the truth. They have reviewed over 140,000 documents, over 100 subpoenas, 1,000 deposition and interviews, and they've been aided in this by professionals who are nonpartisan, career prosecutors, intelligence officials. And throughout this search for the truth, the courts have over and over again affirmed the legitimacy of this effort. They have affirmed that the committee has the right and the duty in its oversight capacity to seek the truth and to look for this ongoing conspiracy that is attacking the freedom to vote. And over time, what we will see over time tonight, what we will see are the results of this painstaking investigation. And I, for one, am so excited to see it. And I can see from this crowd that all of you are excited to see the results of this painstaking investigation as well.
All right, Norm, I wanna come to you next. Now, Donald Trump tried to put the election results into question, not just in 2020, but also in 2016, like laying a foundation for what happened on January 6th. And he did it through, the big lie. And that was already his plan, even when he first ran for office. So after that, an effort not above the law that we see back here rose up in response to that. So
can you talk about where that movement is and what you all are up to today and will be for this weekend, probably after even when the hearings conclude?
Yes, thank you, Ashley. Elizabeth, so wonderful to be with you. Lisa, well spoken as always. And to all of you and are here. I probably should stand with the not above the law sign holders to avoid the feedback. The not above the law movement began when it became clear to all of us, and I know this is true looking around to all of you, that Donald Trump represented a break with the tradition of the American presidency. There have been some American presidents that we have agreed with. Ashley and I were very proud to serve one of them, Barack Obama. There have been some that we have disagreed with over the years. But the moment for me, and it was the seed of what became the nationwide not above the law movement, the seed was when Donald Trump stood up at his first official press conference pre-presidency and said, the ethics laws don't apply to me. A president can't have a conflict. And that foreshadowed all of the illegality, the hate, the assaults on the rule of law, and ultimately the assault on democracy. Because the founding idea of our democracy is that no one is above the law. That's why America exists. Now, we haven't always lived up to that aspiration. There have been times when we've fallen short. We still don't completely live up to that. But to have a president say he is above the law, that takes us back to the age of King George. That's the whole idea we exist. So that was the foundation. A bunch of us came together, and it happened in D.C., but all over the country, folks just like the ones who are here. I can't neglect our wonderful sign holders. I have to turn and talk to them too. And we came together to track the illegality that we predicted would flow from that very first declaration that the law does not apply to him. A president can't have a conflict. And we soon saw the questions that arose about his unholy alliance with Russia, the Mueller investigation. We had watch parties like this that sprang up around the country for various events. I was privileged to go to work in the House of Representatives on the impeachment. And then, of course, you know the rest. And I want to congratulate all of you. I want to congratulate our sign holders, everybody on the dais, everyone who's here, because guess what? For people who are pessimistic, can we do it? Tonight is an answer. The hearings are saying no one is above the law. And for those who say, come on, Norm, you're too optimistic. You've got a half full set of rose-colored glasses on. No, because we had a great national referendum on this question. Is anyone in America above the law? And the country turned out no. And the country turned out in 2020 on our great national referendum. Democracy or Trumpery? We chose democracy, and we can do it again. And it's just folks like you who come to these events. You make it possible. Thank you. That's the overly long answer. I made a speech instead of answering the question. I got so carried away.
I expected nothing less, okay? Nothing less. That was great, though. Thank you. And you all, I'm just messing with you.
I deserve it.
No, it was great. Because you all are here, but you also have microphones that you need to go back and take out into your community and continue. It doesn't stop after we turned out historical numbers in 2020. I want to get a little more to the facts of what that has been happening. So the Department of Justice, the FBI, they've been doing a lot of investigations. Just today, they arrested someone who was running for office that was a part of the insurrection on January 6th. They continue, yes, good for holding them accountable, but they continue to find and do these investigations. So Elizabeth or Norm, I'll let you start, Elizabeth. What has the ongoing investigations uncovered to your knowledge at this point? And if that doesn't work, I'll let you know.
Well, I think, so I want to say, first of all, the word that you used, ongoing, I think is incredibly important for all of us to remember here. This is an ongoing attack on the freedom to vote. This is an ongoing criminal conspiracy. It is an ongoing attack on democracy. And we've seen already hundreds of charges against people who were at the January 6th insurrection. We've seen guilty pleas on the rare charge of seditious conspiracy. But this insurrection was not a one-day event. It is ongoing. And that's why it's so important that all of you are here tonight, because accountability requires everyone to do their job. My job as a lawyer, I do my job every day as well as I can. Up on that Capitol Hill, members of Congress, the select committee, this bipartisan group of members of Congress are doing their job with the hearings tonight. We need everyone to do their jobs, and that includes all of us. We, the people, have an incredibly important job in our constitutional democracy in holding people accountable. So being here tonight, watching these hearings is important. And I know you have so many other things going on in your lives. I'm a mom. I know how it feels to feel overwhelmed with just daily life. And you think keeping up with democracy and, the political events can be hard, but we have to do it. The forces that are working against democracy are counting on us to be too busy, counting on us to lose hope. We cannot lose hope. We cannot lose sight of the fact that accountability requires us to be active participants. Democracy requires us to be active participants. And being here tonight, you are doing that. And I'm so grateful that you are here and that we're all here together.
So what that means in practice. Number one, the job of the committee tonight is to get the truth out, but they're counting on every one of us to watch, to study, to learn, to tell our friends, to tell our families, to get on social media. I even threatened my daughter that I would do a TikTok democracy dance to get the word out. That's number one.
Do it now. Do it now.
That's number one. We need to, that's not just up to the committee. That's up to each and every one of us. And we saw that could work with that great referendum on democracy in 2020. Number two, what the committee needs to do is set up, and again, this comes down to us. They can't get up there and say who to vote and not vote for, like this individual who was arrested today, but we can. We can take the information and say the referendum worked in 2020, but like democracy, we got to refresh. And the information they're providing sets up another referendum in the midterms in 2022. And yes, so we have the cable box, watch and get the truth out. That'll be up here. We have the ballot box. And then there's a third box that is very, very important, the jury box. We already have a federal judge who has said Donald Trump and his co-conspirators likely committed federal crimes. The evidence that is going to come out in the hearings is going to get us, I believe, from likely to proof beyond a reasonable doubt. We are going to see charges, I believe, against Donald Trump finally for his series of crimes, starting in Georgia State, but we also need to respectfully request that the federal government investigate, take these matters seriously, and charge if warranted. The cable box, the ballot box, and the jury box, that's something we all need to do together.
You answered the question before I even asked. I want to thank Norm and Elizabeth for coming out tonight. Thank you so much for always breaking it down, making it simple, easy to digest for people who don't have a lot of time to watch the news every day. So thank you for all you have done to protect our democracy, and will continue to protect our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Norm, I do want to see this democracy dance, though.
All right.
Okay.
TikTok, here I come.
All right. Thanks, Norm and Elizabeth. Next, I have the privilege of introducing Representative Chris Shays, who is a Republican politician.
That's it.
No.
Job's done. I served 13 years in the State House and 21 years in Congress. That's all you need to know.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna let you do a short presentation, then I'm gonna come up and ask you some questions. Okay? Okay.
So I'm in a little trouble. If my wife was here, she would have scolded me because there aren't many chairs and I was sitting in one of them. It just shows you that I'm out of office so long, I didn't care. So I look at this Capitol and I revere it. And when visitors would come to Congress, I would take my time to show them around and I would see the awe that they had, the history that was involved in this Capitol and what it meant. And then I turned on the TV on January 6th and thought, my God, what is happening? Trump supporters, we already know it. We already know so much. They went from down there, up there, and attacked the Capitol and harmed all these officers who were there, who sought to protect my life and the life of everyone else in that Capitol. So we already know a lot. But what I want to say today is that Donald Trump never got it right. He didn't know the beauty of elections. Elections were an opportunity for a candidate to go before the American people, whether that was a small group or a large group, and tell them what you thought and what you wanted, and then ask for their support. Take their time to listen to you, and you might win or you might lose. Now, democracy only works if the candidate who lost is willing to accept the verdict of the American people, accept it, and then make sure that his or her supporters recognize the legitimacy that the person they ran against won. Now, up in the Capitol, when a president is sworn in, it's the most magnificent thing. You see the most powerful person, all of a sudden, a private citizen like all of us, and then you see this individual become the most powerful person in the world. What I used to do, and I was one of just a few people, I would run around, walk around the other side of the Capitol. It was a helicopter, and I would watch the new president march the former president and their family down a carpet, get into a helicopter, salute. And the legitimacy of the democracy we had worked. Now, for democracy not just to work, but to succeed, it needs a president who speaks to our higher nature, who asks us to think about what we could be and what we should be, and not speak to our lower nature. Unfortunately, we've had a president, Donald Trump, who did that, and we're paying the consequences. So what I'm thinking today as I look at all of you is we've got to not only recognize that even Vice President Nixon, when he was defeated by Senator Kennedy, recognized how important it was to accept defeat and acknowledge the winner for the sake of democracy. Think of Al Gore, who lost maybe by 500 votes, but he knew how important it was for the future of our country. He knew it. And I saw him in the Capitol counting the votes and acknowledging that Governor Bush was now president. And Hillary Clinton, she got more votes than Donald Trump, but she knew we have an electoral college. She was there, she acknowledged, and she saluted the process where Donald Trump became president. Well, I went to the last inaugural. I wasn't a congressman then. I wasn't sitting up there. I didn't get to go around the back, but there was no back because Donald Trump was absent. He did not care about our country. He only cared about himself. And in the process, he has brought us to this circumstance. So what I'm saying to all of you is we have a precious country. It's a delicate process, and we cannot tolerate candidates who don't accept defeat. And we certainly can't tolerate the obvious fact that he encouraged people, his supporters, to walk up there, run up there, and like locusts, circle the Capitol and seek to destroy it.
Thank you. I'll give you this. All right, I have a couple questions. I mean, I am a progressive, and you are a moderate Republican, and oftentimes in this city, people don't find spaces where people like us get to talk together and be in communication. But I think what's so important about tonight and the committee is that this is not about party. This is about our country. This is about the people's will. And so I'm excited to be able to have this conversation with you tonight, because it doesn't matter what letter is by our name right now. It's about protecting our Constitution and the country that we all love so much. So in this moment, as you, can you share your thoughts as a former Congress member and as a moderate Republican, as you watch the ongoing attacks on the democracy in the state happening? What were you thinking? You know, you've been in that building, you know, what that day, because it has been a while, and if people haven't been paying attention.
I'll tell you exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I was thinking in just 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, a president who has the leadership to lead and speak to our higher nature spoke to our worst nature as a country, and that was the result. And I thought in just 4 years it could go like that. It taught me something I never believed before, how delicate it is. George Washington warned us about parties, but we've never been concerned about it because in the end, you were a Republican before you were a Democrat. You were a Republican, you were an American before you were a Republican. You were an American before you were a Democrat. Now it's the other way around. The folks up there think of their party as more important than their country. That's the bottom line. And we're paying a huge penalty for it. And so what my message to all of you is, encourage your members to work together. Encourage them to find common ground. That's what our founding fathers designed the Constitution for. It's a Constitution that promotes compromise. Find common ground. And there's a lot of common ground to be found.
Thank you. You know, what do you think in this moment, elected or, you know, Republican voters can be doing right now to stand up for free and fair elections?
Well, there aren't many Republicans who are doing that. And so then you have a question. I'm a Republican, and I can't identify with a party that thinks of themselves as a Trump party, not a Republican party. This is one of the challenges we have, and it's the fault of both parties. When we took over, Republicans took over, we targeted the conservative Democrats who were somewhat in the middle of the political spectrum. When Nancy Pelosi sought to become the speaker, she targeted people like me, and that's fair, but she went after those of us in the middle. So the American people, there are a lot of people who are progressives, there are a lot of people who are conservatives, but most Americans are somewhere in the middle. In Congress, you have mostly progressives, mostly conservatives, and you have an inverted bell curve. You don't have people in the center willing to talk with each other. If I could just illustrate one point.
Please.
We used to play basketball, believe it or not, in the Capitol. It was so much fun. We would go maybe 2 days a week. We'd play from 4 to 5:30. It would be more progressives, conservatives. We'd play with each other, against each other. That's not happening anymore. That small little basketball court that's in the Rayburn building is now filled up with exercise equipment that could be in the other rooms around it. And why? Because nobody is willing to play with each other, to talk with each other. If Republicans and Democrats get together in a car, they think they're bipartisan, but they would have a hard time justifying to their constituents that a Democrat talks to a Republican talks to a Democrat. That is crazy.
So a lot of people thought that Donald Trump might not leave office. Like before it happened, they kind of predicted it. Not everyone. And a lot of people, many people here did work before the election in 2020 to make sure that the election results were protected. But for the average American who hasn't been engaged with them, what would you tell them right now is their call to action in this moment around these committee hearings, heading into a new election cycle? What should the average American be doing today and in the weeks to come?
I would look for candidates, whether they were Republican or Democrat, that are willing to work with each other. I would look for them. And I would also salute people like Adam Kissinger and Liz Cheney for her willingness to make sure this was bipartisan, to take away the foolish argument that some Republicans are making that this is just a partisan look. It is not. It is to save the United States of America and to save our democracy.
All right, last question because we're almost out of time, but I think it's a question that is really important in these moments of what feels like despair and trauma and sadness and heaviness. What in this moment is giving you hope to keep going on?
A group like this, you're giving me hope. You care, and there are people around the world that care. But I think the jury is still behind closed doors. I need to see more Republicans willing to speak out. And so I guess my point to you is when you see those people, reward them. And if you reward them, they'll attract other Republicans who want to also be rewarded. So I guess what gives me hope is that I love my country. 99% of the American people love their country. And but we got to start loving each other as well, and maybe even hug someone you don't usually hug. I want to just say
Can I give you a hug?
I love it, but I am giving up my chair because I do want someone else who needs it. It's right over there. I'm going to be sitting on the grass.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, that brings us to the end of our program. A very exciting announcement. There is Ben & Jerry's somewhere, I think over here. You'll find the Ben & Jerry's. In 5 minutes, there will be Ben & Jerry's. So stretch, do what you need to do before the hearings start. But a couple announcements. First, I just want to thank the folks who are planning. A lot of work goes into doing these events. They didn't ask me to do it, but I think it's important. A lot of work, not just the week before, but months goes on to plan events like this to get this attention. So thank you all for doing that. That's an important effort to fight for our democracy. Our sign holders, thank you. And to all of our distinguished speakers, we know that the first hearing is tonight, but it's not the last hearing. So we want to make sure people tune in on June 7th, 16th, Thursday, June 23rd, and you can watch the hearings on jan6watchevents.com. That's jan6watchevents.com. Please, whatever social media outlet you're on, if you're in group chats, text chains, whatever, use the hashtag #Jan.Justice. Hashtag Jan6Justice. So people can follow that. We can get the conversation going on. We know there's a whole segment of this country not watching these hearings tonight, but it's our responsibility to bring it to their doorstep that the truth must be told. So thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for all you're doing. And let's keep fighting for justice.
Commentator. One of the things, that's Congressman Dean Phillips, I believe, right there in the blue. One of the reasons why they want to do this, one of the reasons why they want to make this case, the members of the committee, is because this is not just about, in their view, a disaster that happened a year and a half ago. They see this as a clear and present threat, a clear and present danger to American democracy.
That is such a key theme and a key point that members of this committee really want to hit home and push back against mostly Republicans, Trump supporters, Trump himself, who talks about the fact that, oh, this is ancient history, why are you...
Bolton, Mississippi, a town with a population of if indeed defeat was the will of the people, to uphold the rule of law, to do what every president who came before him did, and what every president who followed him would do, until Donald Trump. Donald Trump lost the presidential election in 2020. The American people voted him out of office. It was not because of a rigged system. It was not because of voter fraud. Don't believe me? Hear what his former Attorney General had to say about it. I warn those who watching that this contains strong language.
No, just what I had 3 discussions with the president that I can recall. One was on November 23rd, one was on December 1st, and one was on December 14th. And I've been through sort of the give and take of those discussions. And in that context, I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen. It was bullshit. And, I didn't want to be a part of it. And that's one of the reasons that went into me deciding to leave when I did. I observed, I think it was on December 1st, that, how can you can't live in a world where the incumbent administration stays in power based on its view, unsupported by specific evidence, that there was fraud in the election.
Bill Barr, on Election Day 2020, he was the Attorney General of the United States, the top law enforcement official in the country, telling the president exactly what he thought about claims of a stolen election. Donald Trump had his days in court to challenge the results. He was within his rights to seek those judgments. In the United States, law-abiding citizens have those tools for pursuing justice. He lost in the courts, just as he did at the ballot box. And in this country, that's the end of the line. But for Donald Trump, that was only the beginning of what became a sprawling, multi-step conspiracy aimed at overturning the presidential election, aimed at throwing out the votes of millions of Americans, your votes, your voice in our democracy, and replacing the will of the American people with his will to remain in power after his term ended. Donald Trump was at the center of this conspiracy. And ultimately, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, spurred a mob of domestic enemies of the Constitution to march down the Capitol and subvert American democracy. Any legal jargon you hear about seditious conspiracy, obstruction of an official proceeding, conspiracy to defraud the United States, boils down to this. January 6th was the culmination of an attempted coup, a brazen attempt, as one rioter put it shortly after January 6th, to overthrow the government. The violence was no accident. It represents Senator Trump's last stand, most desperate chance to halt the transfer of power. Now, you may hear those words and think, this is just another political attack on Donald Trump by people who don't like him. That's not the case. My colleagues and I all wanted an outside independent commission to investigate January 6th, similar to what we had after 9/11. But after first agreeing to the idea, Donald Trump's allies in Congress put a stop to it. Apparently, they don't want January 6th investigated at all. And in the last 17 months, many of those same people have tried to whitewash what happened on January 6th, to rewrite history, call it a tourist visit, label it legitimate political discourse. Donald Trump and his followers have adopted the words of the songwriter, "Do you believe me or your lying eyes?" We can't sweep what happened under the rug. The American people deserve answers. So I come before you this evening, not as a Democrat, but as an American who swore an oath to defend the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't protect just Democrats or just Republicans. It protects all of us, we the people. And this scheme was an attempt to undermine the will of the people. So tonight, and over the next few weeks, we're going to remind you of the reality of what happened that day. But our work must do much more than just look backwards. The cause of our democracy remains in danger. The conspiracy to thwart the will of the people is not over. There are those in this audience who thirst for power but have no love or respect for what makes America great: devotion to the Constitution, allegiance to the rule of law, our shared journey to build a more perfect union. January 6th and the lies that led to insurrection have put 2.5 centuries of constitutional democracy at risk. The world is watching what we do here. America has long been expected to be a shining city on the hill, a beacon of hope and freedom, a model for others when we are at our best. How can we play that role when our house is in such disorder? We must confront the truth with candor, resolve, and determination. We need to show that we are worthy of the gifts that are the birthright of every American. That begins here, and it begins now, with a true accounting of what happened and what led to the attack on our Constitution and our democracy. In this moment, when the dangers of our Constitution and our democracy loom large, nothing could be more important. Working alongside the public servants on this dais has been one of the greatest honors of my time in Congress. It's been a particular privilege to count as a partner in this effort and to count as a friend the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney. She's a patriot, a public servant of profound courage, and the Constitution. It's my pleasure to recognize Ms. Cheney for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me echo those words about the importance of bipartisanship and what a tremendous honor it is to work on this committee. Mr. Chairman, at 6:01 p.m. on January 6th, after he spent hours watching a violent mob besiege, attack, and invade our Capitol, Donald Trump tweeted, but he did not condemn the attack. Instead, he justified it. These are the things and events that happen, he said, when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away from great patriots who've been badly and unfairly treated for so long. As you will see in the hearings to come, President Trump believed his supporters at the Capitol. This is what he told his staff as they pleaded with him to call off the mob, to instruct his supporters to leave. Over a series of hearings in the coming weeks, you will hear testimony, live and on video, from more than half a dozen former White House staff in the Trump administration, all of whom were in the West Wing of the White House on January 6th. You will hear testimony that, quote, the president did not really want to put anything out, calling off the riot or asking his supporters to leave. You will hear that President Trump was yelling and, quote, really angry at advisors who told him he needed to be doing something more. And aware of the rioters' chance to hang Mike Pence, the president responded with this sentiment, quote, maybe our supporters have the right idea. Mike Pence, quote, deserves it. You will hear evidence that President Trump refused for hours to do what his staff, his family, and many of his other advisors begged him to do: immediately instruct his supporters to stand down and evacuate the Capitol. Tonight, you will see never-before-seen footage of the brutal attack on our Capitol, an attack that unfolded while a few blocks away, President Trump sat watching television in the dining room next to the Oval Office. You will hear audio from the brave police officers battling for their lives and ours, fighting to defend our democracy against a violent mob Donald Trump refused to call off. Tonight and in the weeks to come, you will see evidence of what motivated this violence, including directly from those who participated in this attack. You will see video of them explaining what caused them to do it. You will see their posts on social media. We will show you what they have said in federal court. On this point, there is no room for debate. Those who invaded our Capitol and battled law enforcement for hours were motivated by what President Trump had told them, that the election was stolen and that he was the rightful president. President Trump summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. You will also hear about plots to commit seditious conspiracy on January 6th, a crime defined in our laws as conspiring to overthrow, put down, or destroy by force the government of the United States, or to oppose by force the authority thereof. Multiple members of two groups, the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, have been charged with this crime for their involvement in the events leading up to and on January 6th. Some have pled guilty. The attack on our Capitol was not a spontaneous riot. Intelligence available before January 6th identified plans to, quote, invade the Capitol, occupy the Capitol, and take other steps to halt Congress's count of electoral votes that day. In our hearings to come, we will identify elements of those plans, and we will show specifically how a group of Proud Boys led a mob into the Capitol building on January 6th. Tonight, I am going to describe for you some of what our committee has learned and highlight initial findings you will see this month in our hearings. As you hear this, all Americans should keep in mind this fact. On the morning of January 6th, President Donald Trump's intention was to remain President of the United States, despite the lawful outcome of the 2020 election and in violation of his constitutional obligation to relinquish power. Over multiple months, Donald Trump oversaw and coordinated a sophisticated 7-part plan to overturn the presidential election and prevent the transfer of presidential power. In our hearings, you will see evidence of each element of this plan. In our second hearing, you will see that Donald Trump and his advisors knew that he had in fact lost the election. But despite this, President Trump engaged in a massive effort to spread false and fraudulent information, to convince huge portions of the US population that fraud had stolen the election from him. This was not true. Jason Miller was a senior Trump campaign spokesman. In this clip, Miller describes a call between the Trump campaign's internal data expert and President Trump a few days after the 2020 election.
I was in the Oval Office, and at some point in the conversation, Matt Oskowski, who is the lead data person, was brought on, and I remember he delivered to the president pretty blunt terms that he was going to lose.
And that was based, Mr. Miller, on Matt and the data team's assessment of the sort of county by county, state by state results as reported?
Correct.
Alex Cannon was one of President Trump's campaign lawyers who previously worked for the Trump Organization. One of his responsibilities was to assess allegations of election fraud in November 2020. Here is one sample of his testimony discussing what he told White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows.
I remember a call with Mr. Meadows, where Mr. Meadows was asking me what I was finding and if I was finding anything. And I remember sharing with him that we weren't finding anything that would be sufficient to change the results in any of the key states.
When was that conversation?
Probably in November, mid to late November. I think it was before my child was born.
And what was Mr. Meadows' reaction to that information?
I believe the words he used were, "So there's no there there."
There's no there. The Trump campaign's general counsel, Matt Morgan, gave similar testimony. He explained that all of the fraud allegations and the campaign's other election arguments, taken together and viewed in the best possible light for President Trump, would still not change the outcome of the election. President Trump's Attorney General Bill Barr also told Donald Trump his election claims were wrong.
Repeatedly told the president in no uncertain terms that I did not see evidence of fraud, and that would have affected the outcome of the election. And frankly, a year and a half later, I haven't seen anything to change my mind on that.
Attorney General Barr also told President Trump that his allegations about Dominion voting machines were groundless.
I saw absolutely zero basis for the allegations, but they were made in such a sensational way that they obviously were influencing a lot of people, members of the public, that there was this systemic corruption in the system and that their votes didn't count and that these machines controlled by somebody else were actually determining it, which was complete nonsense. And it was being laid out there. And I told them that it was crazy stuff and they were wasting their time on that. And it was doing a grave disservice to the country.
But President Trump persisted, repeating the false Dominion allegations in public at least a dozen more times, even after his attorney general told him they were, quote, complete nonsense. And after Barr's resignation on December 23rd, the acting attorney general who replaced him, Jeff Rosen, and the acting deputy, Richard Donahue, told President Trump over and over again that the evidence did not support allegations he was making in public. Many of President Trump's White House staff also recognized that the evidence did not support the claims President Trump was making. This is the president's daughter commenting on Bill Barr's statement that the department found no fraud sufficient to overturn the election.
How did that affect your perspective about the election when Attorney General Barr made that statement?
It affected my perspective. I respect Attorney General Barr. So I accepted what he was saying.
As you will hear on Monday, the president had every right to litigate his campaign claims, but he ultimately lost more than 60 cases in state and federal courts. The president's claims in the election cases were so frivolous and unsupported that the president's lead lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, not only lost the lawsuits, his license to practice law was suspended. Here's what the court said of Mr. Giuliani. Giuliani communicated demonstrably false and misleading statements to courts, lawmakers, and the public at large in his capacity as lawyer for former President Donald J. Trump and the Trump campaign in connection with Trump's failed effort at re-election in 2020. As you will see in great detail in our hearings, President Trump ignored the rulings of our nation's courts. He ignored his own campaign leadership, his White House staff, many Republican state officials. He ignored the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security. President Trump invested millions of dollars of campaign funds purposely spreading false information, running ads he knew were false, and convincing millions of Americans that the election was corrupt and that he was the true president. As you will see, this misinformation campaign provoked the violence on January 6th. In our third hearing, you will see that President Trump corruptly planned to replace the Attorney General of the United States so the U.S. Justice Department would spread his false stolen election claims. In the days before January 6th, President Trump told his top Justice Department officials, quote, "Just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman." Senior Justice Department officials, men he had appointed, told him they could not do that because it was not true. So President Trump decided to replace them. He offered Jeff Clark, an environmental lawyer at the Justice Department, the job of acting Attorney General, including sending this letter to Georgia and 5 other states, saying the U.S. Department of Justice had, quote, "identified significant concerns that may have impacted the outcome of the election." This letter is a lie. The Department of Justice had in fact repeatedly told President Trump exactly the opposite, that they had investigated his stolen election allegations and found no credible fraud that could impact the outcome of the election. This letter and others like it would have urged multiple states to withdraw their official and lawful electoral votes for Biden. Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue described Jeff Clark's letter this way, quote, "This would be a grave step for the department to take and could have tremendous constitutional, political, and social ramifications for this country." The committee agrees with Mr. Donahue's assessment. Had Clark assumed the role of Attorney General in the days before January 6th and issued these letters, the ramifications could indeed have been grave. Mr. Donahue also said this about Clark's plan.
And I recall toward the end saying, "What you're proposing is nothing less than the United States Justice Department meddling in the outcome of the presidential election."
In our hearings, you will hear firsthand how the senior leadership of the Department of Justice threatened to resign, how the White House counsel threatened to resign, and how they confronted Donald Trump and Jeff Clark in the Oval Office. The men involved, including Acting Attorney General Jeff Rosen and Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue, were appointed by President Trump. These men honored their oaths of office, they did their duty, and you will hear from them in our hearings. By contrast, Jeff Clark has invoked his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination and refused to testify. Representative Scott Perry, who was also involved in trying to get Clark appointed as Attorney General, has refused to testify here. As you will see, Representative Perry contacted the White House in the weeks after January 6th to seek a presidential pardon. Multiple other Republican congressmen also sought presidential pardons for their roles in attempting to overturn the 2020 election. In our fourth hearing, we will focus on President Trump's efforts to pressure Vice President Mike Pence to refuse to count electoral votes on January 6th. Vice President Pence has spoken publicly about this.
President Trump is wrong. I had no right to overturn the election. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. And frankly, there is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president.
What President Trump demanded that Mike Pence do wasn't just wrong, it was illegal and it was unconstitutional. You will hear this in great detail from the Vice President's former general counsel. Witnesses in these hearings will explain how the former Vice President and his staff informed President Trump over and over again that what he was pressuring Mike Pence to do was illegal. As you will hear, President Trump engaged in a relentless effort to pressure Pence, both in private and in public. You will see the evidence of that pressure from multiple witnesses, live and on video. Vice President Pence demonstrated his loyalty to Donald Trump consistently over 4 years, but he knew that he had a higher duty to the United States Constitution. This is testimony from the Vice President's Chief of Staff.
So I think the Vice President was proud of his 4 years of service, and he felt like much had been accomplished in those 4 years. And I think he was proud to have stood beside the President for all that had been done. But I think he ultimately knew that his fidelity to the Constitution was his first and foremost oath. And that's what he articulated publicly, and I think that that's what he felt.
his fidelity to the Constitution was more important than his fidelity to President Trump and his
The
desire.
oath he took.
Yes.
You'll also hear about a lawyer named John Eastman. Mr. Eastman was deeply involved in President Trump's plans. You'll hear from former Fourth Circuit federal judge Michael Ludig, a highly respected leading conservative judge. John Eastman clerked for Judge Ludig. Judge Ludig provided counsel to the vice president's team in the days before January 6th. The judge will explain how Eastman, quote, was wrong at every turn. And you will see the email exchanges between Eastman and the vice president's counsel as the violent attack on Congress was underway. Mr. Jacob said this to Mr. Eastman: "Thanks to your bullshit, we are under siege." You will also see evidence that John Eastman did not actually believe the legal position he was taking. In fact, a month before the 2020 election, Eastman took exactly the opposite view on the same legal issues. In the course of the Select Committee's work to obtain information from Mr. Eastman, we have had occasion to present evidence to a federal judge. The judge evaluated the facts, and he reached the conclusion that President Trump's efforts to pressure Vice President Pence to act illegally by refusing to count electoral votes likely violated 2 federal criminal statutes. And the judge also said this: if Dr. Eastman and President Trump's plan had worked, it would have permanently ended the peaceful transition of power, undermining American democracy and Constitution. If the country does not commit to investigating and pursuing accountability for those responsible, the court fears January 6th will repeat itself. Every American should read what this federal judge has written. The same judge, Judge Carter, issued another decision on Tuesday night, just this week, indicating that John Eastman and other Trump lawyers knew that their legal arguments had no real chance of success in court, but they relied on those arguments anyway to try to, quote, overturn a Democratic election. And you will hear that while Congress was under attack on January 6th and the hours following the violence, the Trump legal team in the Willard Hotel War Room continued to work to halt the count of electoral votes. In our 5th hearing, you will see evidence that President Trump corruptly pressured state legislators and election officials to change election results. You will hear additional details about President Trump's call to Georgia officials, urging them to, quote, find 11,780 votes that did not exist, and his efforts to get states to rescind certified electoral slates without factual basis and contrary to law. You will hear new details about the Trump campaign and other Trump associates' efforts to instruct Republican officials in multiple states to create intentionally false electoral slates and transmit those slates to Congress, to the Vice President, and the National Archives, falsely certifying that Trump won states he actually lost. In our final 2 June hearings, you will hear how President Trump summoned a violent mob and directed them illegally to march on the United States Capitol. While the violence was underway, President Trump failed to take immediate action to stop the violence and instruct his supporters to leave the Capitol. As we present these initial findings, keep 2 points in mind. First, our investigation is still ongoing, so what we make public here will not be the complete set of information we will ultimately disclose. And second, the Department of Justice is currently working with cooperating witnesses and has disclosed to date only some of the information it has identified from encrypted communications and other sources. On December 18th, 2020, a group including General Michael Flynn, Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, and others visited the White House. They stayed late into the evening. We know that the group discussed a number of dramatic steps, including having the military seize voting machines and potentially rerun elections. You will also hear that President Trump met with that group alone for a period of time before White House lawyers and other staff discovered the group was there and rushed to intervene. A little more than an hour after Ms. Powell, Mr. Giuliani, General Flynn, and the others finally left the White House, President Trump sent the tweet on the screen now, telling people to come to Washington on January 6th. Be there, he instructed them. Will be wild. As you will see, this was a pivotal moment. This tweet initiated a chain of events. The tweet led to the planning for what occurred on January 6th, including by the Proud Boys, who ultimately led the invasion of the Capitol and the violence on that day. The indictment of a group of Proud Boys alleges that they planned, quote, to oppose by force the authority of the government of the United States. And according to the Department of Justice, on January 6, 2021, the defendants directed, mobilized, and led members of the crowd onto the Capitol grounds and into the Capitol, leading to the dismantling of metal barricades, the destruction of property, the breaching of the Capitol building, and the assaults on law enforcement. Although certain former Trump officials have argued that they did not anticipate violence on January 6th, the evidence suggests otherwise. As you will see in our hearings, the White House was receiving specific reports in the days leading up to January 6th, including during President Trump's Ellipse rally, indicating that elements in the crowd were preparing for violence at the Capitol. And on the evening of January 5th, the president's close advisor, Steve Bannon, said this on his podcast.
All hell is going to break loose tomorrow. Just understand this. All hell is going to break loose tomorrow.
As part of our investigation, we will present information about what the White House and other intelligence agencies knew and why the Capitol was not better prepared. But we will not lose sight of the fact that the Capitol Police did not cause the crowd to attack. And we will not blame the violence that day, violence provoked by Donald Trump, on the officers who bravely defended all of us. In our final hearing, you will hear a moment-by-moment account of the hours-long attack from more than half a dozen White House staff, both live in the hearing room and via videotape testimony. There's no doubt that President Trump was well aware of the violence as it developed. White House staff urged President Trump to intervene and call off the mob. Here is a document written while the attack was underway by a member of the White House staff, advising what the president needed to say. Quote, anyone who entered the Capitol without proper authority should leave immediately. This is exactly what his supporters on Capitol Hill and nationwide were urging the president to do. He would not. You will hear that leaders on Capitol Hill begged the president for help, including Republican leader McCarthy, who was, quote, scared, and called multiple members of President Trump's family after he could not persuade the president himself. Not only did President Trump refuse to tell the mob to leave the Capitol, he placed no call to any element of the United States government to instruct that the Capitol be defended. He did not call his Secretary of Defense on January 6th. He did not talk to his Attorney General. He did not talk to the Department of Homeland Security. President Trump gave no order to deploy the National Guard that day, and he made no effort to work with the Department of Justice to coordinate and deploy law enforcement assets. But Vice President Pence did each of those things. For example, here is what General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, testified to this committee.
There were two or three calls with Vice President Pence. He was very animated, and he issued very explicit, very direct, unambiguous orders. There was no question about that. And I can get you the exact quotes, I guess, from some of our records somewhere, but he was very animated, very direct, very firm, and to Secretary Miller. Get the military down here, get the Guard down here, put down this situation, etc.
By contrast, here is General Milley's description of his conversation with President Trump's Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, on January 6th.
He said, we have to kill the narrative that the Vice President is making all the decisions. We need to establish the narrative that, that the president is still in charge and that things are steady or stable or what's that thing. I immediately interpret that as politics, politics, politics. Red flag for me personally, no action, but I remember it distinctly.
And you will hear from witnesses how the day played out inside the White House, how multiple White House staff resigned in disgust, and how President Trump would not ask his supporters to leave the Capitol. It was only after multiple hours of violence that President Trump finally released a video instructing the riotous mob to leave. And as he did so, he said to them, quote, "We love you, and you're very special." You will also hear that in the immediate aftermath of January 6th, members of the president's family, White House staff, and others tried to step in to stabilize the situation, quote, "to land the plane before the presidential transition on January 20th. You will hear about members of the Trump cabinet discussing the possibility of invoking the 25th Amendment and replacing the President of the United States. Multiple members of President Trump's own cabinet resigned immediately after January 6th. One member of the cabinet suggested that the remaining cabinet officers needed to take a more active role in running the White House and the administration. But most emblematic of those days is this exchange of texts between Sean Hannity and former President Trump's press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany. Sean Hannity wrote in part, "He now, no more crazy people, no more stolen election talk. Yes, impeachment and 25th Amendment are real. Many people will quit." Ms. McEnany responded in part, "Love that. That's the playbook." White House staff knew that President Trump was willing to entertain and use conspiracy theories to achieve. The president needed to be cut off from him. They knew that President Donald Trump was too dangerous to be left alone, at least until he left office on January 20th. These are important facts for Congress and the American people to understand fully. When a president fails to take the steps necessary to preserve our union, or worse, causes a constitutional crisis, we're at a moment of maximum danger for our republic. Some in the White House took responsible steps to try to prevent January 6th. Others egged the president on. Others who could have acted refused to do so. In this case, the White House counsel was so concerned about potentially lawless activity that he threatened to resign multiple times. That is exceedingly rare and exceedingly serious. It requires immediate attention, especially when the entire team threatens to resign. However, in the Trump White House, it was not exceedingly rare, and it was not treated seriously. This is a clip of Jared Kushner addressing multiple threats by White House counsel Pat Cipollone and his team of lawyers to resign in the weeks before January 6th.
Jared, are you aware of instances where Pat Cipollone threatened to resign?
I kind of, like I said, my interest at that time was on trying to get as many pardons done. And I know that, he was always, him and the team were always saying, "Oh, we're going to resign. We're not going to be here if this happens, if that happens." So I kind of took it up to just be whining, to be honest with you.
Whining. There's a reason why people serving in our government take an oath to the Constitution. As our founding fathers recognized, democracy is fragile. People in positions of public trust are duty-bound to defend it, to step forward when action is required. In our country, we don't swear an oath to an individual or a political party. We take our oath to defend the United States Constitution, and that oath must mean something. Tonight, I say this to my Republican colleagues who are defending the indefensible. There will come a day when Donald Trump is gone, but your dishonor will remain. Finally, I ask all of our fellow Americans, as you watch our hearings over the coming weeks, please remember what's at stake. Remember the men and women who have fought and died so that we can live under the rule of law, not the rule of men. I ask you to think of the scene in our Capitol Rotunda on the night of January 6th. There, in a sacred space in our constitutional republic, the place where our presidents lie in state, watched over by statues of Washington and Jefferson, Lincoln and Grant, Eisenhower, Ford, and Reagan. Against every wall that night encircling the room, there were SWAT teams, men and women in tactical gear with long guns, deployed inside our Capitol building. There in the rotunda, these brave men and women rested beneath paintings depicting the earliest scenes of our republic, including one painted in 1824 depicting George Washington resigning his commission, voluntarily relinquishing power, handing control of the Continental Army back to Congress. With this noble act, Washington set the indispensable example of the peaceful transfer of power, what President Reagan called nothing less than a miracle. The sacred obligation to defend this peaceful transfer of power has been honored by every American president, except one. As Americans, we all have a duty to ensure that what happened on January 6th never happens again, to set aside partisan battles, to stand together to perpetuate and preserve our great republic. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
As we provide answers to American people about January 6th, it's important that we remember exactly what took place. That this was no tourist visit to the Capitol. Most of the footage we are about to play has never been seen. The Select Committee obtained it as a part of our investigation. This isn't easy to watch. I want to warn everyone that this video includes violence and strong language. Without objection, I include in the record a video presentation of the violence of January 6th.
Ready your board! Ready your board! Ready your board!
Yeah, just for awareness, be advised, there's probably about 300 Proud Boys. They're marching eastbound in this 400 block of kind of Independence, actually on the mall towards the United States Capitol.
I am not allowed to say what's going to happen today because everyone's just going to have to watch for themselves. But it's going to happen. Something's going to happen.
Who's free? Our streets! Who's free? Our streets! Who's free? Our streets! We are on your side. Don't make us go against you. Understand the side. Pick the side. These are our streets.
20 bucks a picture.
I hope Mike is going to do the right thing. I hope so. I hope so. Because if Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election. All Vice President Pence has to do is send it back to the states to recertify. And we become president, and you are the happiest people. Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us. And if he doesn't, that will be a sad day for our country. Because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
Cruiser 50, it does look like we're going to have an ad hoc march stepping off here. There's a crowd surge heading east.
We love Trump! 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 We love Trump!
Mike Pence, I hope you're going to stand up for the good of our Constitution and for the good of our country. And if you're not, I'm going to be very disappointed in you. I will tell you right now.
Get back, lady! Get back, lady!
Priority. We just had process T circle, breach the line. We need backup.
Madam Speaker, the Vice President and the United States Senate.
We're going to give riot warning. The CCL lab is here. We're going to give riot warning. We're going to try and get compliance, but this is now effectively a riot.
49 hours declaring it a riot.
5 to 50 be advised, Cal Police 1 advised they're trying to breach and get into the Capitol.
Yeah, copy. We're about 5 minutes out. We're trying to make our way through all this. We have a breach of the Capitol! Breach of the Capitol to the upper level!
Be advised, they're requesting additional resources on the east side as they've broken into that window and they're trying to kick it in.
Without objection, the chair declares the House in recess pursuant to Clause 12B of Rule 1.
Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. The U.S. demands the truth. Bring out Pence! Bring out Pence! Bring out Pence!
You never sprayed another American that will fight for you. Get him back there! What's we can't hold this, we're gonna get too many fucking people. Look at this fucking bandit. We're fucked.
We need an area for the housing members. They're all walking over now through the tunnels. We're trying to hold the upper deck. We're trying to hold the upper deck now. We need to hold the doors of the Capitol. I need court support. We lost our life. We're holding the line. All LTD, step back. All LTD, step back up to the upper deck. All LTD, step back to the upper deck. And stop.
Cruiser 50, be advised that Capitol Police is going to start moving their resources inside. They're going to start the M4 officers first.
Okay, H208 with 4 members. The door's barricaded. There's people flooded the hallways outside. We have no way out.
In fact, officers still remaining on the house floor, on the third floor, to use the subways themselves. It's time to evacuate so we can secure the members on the other side. Copy.
It's up to us people now, the American people. What are you ready to do? One more time. What are you ready to do? And whatever it takes, I'll lay my life down if it takes. Absolutely. That's why we showed up today.
You back up!
Crazy, some of that left turn for backup.
They were peaceful people. These were great people. The crowd was unbelievable. And I mentioned the word love. The love in the air. I've never seen anything like it.
There's no what?
Pursuant to the order of the committee of tonight, the chair declares the committee in recess for a period of approximately 10 minutes.
An absolutely devastating film of footage, much of which we had never seen before. And in fact, some of the officers who served so valiantly that day were watching that film you just watched, that 12-minute film, from inside the committee room, and it was an emotional moment for them as they watched this horrifying spectacle. Before that film, we saw a presentation from the chairman of the committee, Benny Thompson of Mississippi, and even more powerful presentation from the vice chair, Republican Liz Cheney, who offered firsthand testimonies with videos and texts from Trump administration officials and Trump family members and Trump loyalists all offering a trail of footprints leading directly from that horrific insurrection, this attack on the Capitol, this attack on democracy, footprints traced all the way back to Donald Trump. Let's talk about this, Dana, because this was about Donald Trump, this presentation.
No question about it, especially the very lengthy, very powerful presentation from Liz Cheney that can be summed up in one of her quotes where she says, "There's no room for debate. Those who invaded our Capitol and battled law enforcement for hours were motivated by what President Trump had told them." And then she said, "President Trump summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack." That is perhaps the best summary that she gave of all of the incredible, really unbelievable details that she not only showed, the clips that she played, the quotes that she gave, about the way that the former president seemed to have not listened to the people who were telling him it's not true.
Yeah, and Jamie, we heard Attorney General Barr use the terms, I'm quoting here, so apologies, but bullshit, crazy, and nonsense describing Trump's election claims and those of supporters. And we heard Ivanka Trump, the president's daughter, his favorite child, talking about how credible she found Bill Barr.
Right, and Mark Short as well. I want to talk about Bill Barr for a minute. I think he is a key witness. He is the highest ranking former Trump official. And the fact that he came out and gave this, I'm told, is a key part of the committee's evidence. They say he's one of their strongest witnesses. We also heard from Mark Short there, the chief of staff for Mike Pence. I think what was so striking for me was the testimony was very sober.
If you have a USB cable, you can just plug it in on this side.
The committee had said that this was made for TV. That didn't feel as if it was made for TV.
This was made for the court of law, and I'll tell you why, because of Bill Barr. Up until
No
now,
problem.
we have had this question of whether you
go
can
into here.
prove
That's a fast
what
charge, I
Donald
think.
Trump knew and when
One
he
of
knew
those.
it. Did he have the criminal intent? If they're right, if they can prove the statements that they have said, he had consciousness that his lie was in fact a lie. He was aware that what he was professing to the American public was not only going to lead to the obstruction
charge
of
your
the
phone?
proceeding,
My phone is
but also
dying.
it's
Yeah,
going to
go
lead
for
to
it.
violence, and he knew it on their lips. That's huge.
One thing that we shouldn't forget, and what
do
Liz Cheney
you
said
need a
that
cable?
connects to that horrific. At the time, as it was ongoing, the riots getting violent, and we were seeing that Trump tweets at 2:24, attacks on Mike Pence. That tweet is read by a bullhorn on the steps of the
Never seen
Capitol,
that before.
attacking Pence.
Yeah.
Those rioters then chanted, "Hang Mike Pence," and continued on to the Capitol. It's chilling.
Collective dots.
And the committee, Liz Cheney made clear, wants to prove to Laura's point, criminality. That the president of the United States knew. He knew he had lost. He knew what he was saying was a lie. He continued to use the levers of power to try to keep power. And she exposed, I think, what is the other biggest fraud of the Trump presidency. He lied to his own people. He lied to his own people. There were people from 47 states, 823 people have been charged so far, who came here based on his lie. And it's clear she wants to use Bill Barr, Ivanka Trump, and all the other people in Trump's circle to say, this is his team. He lied to you.
Yeah, absolutely. The hearing is going to resume soon with live witnesses from two key witnesses to the insurrection, a wounded Capitol police officer and a documentary filmmaker. Break will be ready.
Best for you. Put in the Shays and their PBM. They're doing what's best for them. PBMs negotiate billions of dollars in discounts and rebates on medicines, but don't share those savings directly with you. They decide if you'll get your medicines and what they'll cost you. So you wind up battling insurance and their PBMs for your medicines instead of battling your illness. Tell Congress to fix PBMs and lower costs for patients. Go to pharma.org/betterway. Paid for by Pharma.
Cracked windshield? Schedule it SafeLight. We'll come to you to fix it. This customer was enjoying her morning walk. We texted her when we were on our way. She could track us and see exactly when we'd arrive.
I have a few more minutes.
We came to her. Service.
We did the Narrows instead. Oh, yeah. We tried to get the permit. We couldn't get it. It's magnificent. Yeah.
Did you get a tour?
Did it all. I mean, my dream is to do the overnight. You know, I want to do the 16 miles overnight. Yeah. There's like the Needles, and there's like a couple different parts, right? Yeah. Where do you start? Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Cool. So Zion is now the most visited park in the country. Yeah. Yeah. So especially during the pandemic, like attendance skyrocketed. So yeah, they do a lottery now where you can win. You can still go to the Narrows, but like I have a feeling the Narrows was. This is my second time to the Narrows. But like last time we went, there were like a few dozen people. This time there were hundreds. It takes away from like the adventures of it. But that being said, it is. Yeah, I can see it being a I was there for and I did twice. The first time was during getting off last year. Different hills. Yeah, it's kind of crowded. Like, you know, in the morning tomorrow. I got up there at sunrise. I was second person. Jonathan, you really dedicated yourself to it and paid off. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. Highly recommend. Yeah, the water was cold. You know, it was like, the water was like mid-50s. It was like, when you stepped in it initially, it felt like ice. You know, it felt so cold. But it felt cold. But your feet adjusted to it, and so we were okay.
Extraordinary hearing of the January 6th Select Committee is about to resume with the first live testimony of the evening. We're going to hear from two witnesses who had an up-close view of the mob that stormed the Capitol. They are U.S. Capitol Police Officer Caroline Edwards, who's one of the first people injured during the siege. The other is documentary filmmaker Nick Quested, who had unique access to the far-right extremist group, the Proud Boys, part in the attack. And leaders of them were indicted earlier this week for a very serious, seditious conspiracy. You might also recall boys from the presidential when Chris Wallace asked Donald Trump to condemn the Proud Boys, and he told them to stand back and stand by, or words to those effect. And the Oath Keepers, another far-right paramilitary group involved in the attack. Let's listen.
The committee will be in order. I want to thank our witnesses for being with us this evening to share their firsthand accounts of the hearing are in the room with us, along with members, friends, and widows of the officers who lost their lives as a result of the attack. All for being here for us, American people. All United States Capitol Police since 2017. On January 6th, Officer Edwards was assigned to the first responder unit which serves as the first line of defense at the Capitol complex. She also served as a member of the Civil Disturbance Unit, a special subset of the uniformed division trained to respond to mass demonstration events. Officer Edwards is a graduate of the University of Georgia and currently is working on a master's degree in intelligence analysis from Johns Hopkins University. Nick Quistad, acclaimed filmmaker, credits documenting stories in Syria and Iraq. On January 6th, Mr. Quickstead was working on a documentary about, quote, why Americans are so divided when Americans have so much in common, end quote. During that day, Mr. Quickstead interviewed and documented movements of the people around the Capitol in first moments of the violence against the Capitol Police and the chaos that ensued. We'll now swear in our witnesses. The witnesses will please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm on the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Let the record reflect the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Without objection, the witness's statement will be included in the record. Pursuant to Section 5C8 of House Resolution 503, I recognize myself for questioning. As you saw just a few minutes ago, Proud Boys instigated the first breach of the Capitol just before 1:00 p.m., where rioters pushed over barricades near the Peace Circle at the foot of the Capitol. Our two witnesses tonight were both there at the time of that first breach. Officer Edwards was standing with other officers behind a line of bike racks that marked the perimeter of the Capitol grounds. She bravely tried to ban the crowd from advancing on the Capitol. Unfortunately, she was overrun and knocked unconscious as on the Capitol. A quick few yards away from Officer Edwards, taking footage of Proud Boys as part of his work on a documentary film. Most of his footage has never been shown publicly before we shared it this evening. Officer Edwards, I'd like to start by asking if you could tell us why you believe it's important for you to share your story this evening with the committee and the American public. Please, your microphone.
You're muted. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate it. And thank you to the committee for having me here to testify. I was called a lot of things on January 6, 2021. Nancy called incompetent, hero, and a villain. I was called a traitor to my country and my Constitution. In actuality, I was none of those. I was an American, standing face to face with other Americans, asking myself many, many times how we had gotten here. I had been called names before, and never had my patriotism or duty been called into question. I, who got up every day, no matter how early the hour or how late I got in the night before, to put on my uniform and to protect America's symbol of democracy. I, who spent countless hours in the baking sun and freezing snow to make sure that America's elected officials were able to do their job. I, whose literal blood, sweat, and tears were shed that day defending the building that I spent countless holidays and weekends working in. I am the proud granddaughter of a Marine that fought in the Chosin Reservoir in the Korean War. I think of my papa often in these days, how he was so young and thrown into a battle he never saw coming and answered the call at a great personal cost. How he lived the rest of his days with bullets in his legs, but never once complained about his sacrifice. I would like to think that he would be proud of me, proud of his granddaughter that stood her ground that day and continued fighting, even though she was wounded, like he did many years ago. I am my grandfather's granddaughter, proud to put on a uniform and serve my country. They dared to question my honor. They dared to question my loyalty. And they dared my duty. I'm a proud American, and I gladly sacrifice everything to make sure that the America my grandfather defended is many years to come. Thank you.
Officer Edwards, your story and your service is important, and I thank you for being here tonight. Ms. Quickstead, I also like to ask you to introduce yourself. Can you tell us how you found yourself in Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021?
Good evening, Chair and Madam Vice Chair. Thank you for the introduction. As stated in the winter of 2020, I was working on a documentary. As part of the documentary, several rallies in Washington, D.C. I learned there would be a rally on the Mall on May 6th. I came down to document the rally. According to the permit of the event, there was going to be a rally at the Ellipse. We arrived at the Mall and observed a large contingent of Proud Boys marching towards the Capitol. We filmed them, and almost immediately I was separated from my colleagues. I documented the crowd turn from protesters to rioters to insurrectionists. I was surprised at the size of the group, the anger and the profanity. And for anyone who didn't understand how violent that event was, I saw it, I documented it, and I experienced it. I heard incredibly aggressive chanting, and I subsequently shared that footage with the authorities. I'm here today pursuing
extensive and to understand what led the Proud Boys, other rioters, to the Capitol on January 6th. We've obtained substantial evidence showing that the president's December 19th tweet calling his followers to Washington, D.C. on January 6th energized individuals from the Proud Boys and other extremist groups. I'd like a brief video highlighting some of this evidence.
My name is Marcus Childress, and I'm an investigative counsel for the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol.
What do you want to call him? Give me a name. Give me a
White
name.
supremacists and
Would you like me to condemn Proud Boys? Stand back and stand by.
After he made this comment, Enrique Terrio, then chairman of the Proud Boys, said on Parler, "Standing by, sir." During our investigation, we learned that this comment during the presidential debate actually led to an increase in membership from the Proud Boys.
Would you say that Proud Boys numbers increased after the stand back, stand by comment?
Exponentially. I'd say tripled probably, with the potential for a lot more eventually.
And did you ever sell any stand back and stand by merchandise?
One of the vendors on my page actually beat me to it, but I wish I would have made a stand back, stand by shirt.
On December 19th, President Trump tweeted about the January 6th rally and told attendees, "Be there, we'll be wild." Many of the witnesses that we interviewed were inspired by the president's call and came to DC for January 6th. But the extremists, they took it a step further. They viewed a day later, the department adds how the Proud Boys created a chat called the Ministry of Self-Defense Leadership Chat. In this chat, the Proud Boys established a command structure in anticipation of coming back to DC on January 6th. The Department of Justice describes Mr. Tario coming into possession of a document called the 1776 Returns, which describes individuals occupying key buildings around the United States Capitol. The Oath Keepers are another group that the committee investigated.
You better get your ass to DC, folks, this Saturday.
Yeah, if you don't, there'll be no more republic. But we're not going to let that happen. It's not even an if. It's either President Trump is encouraged and bolstered and strengthened to do what he must do, or we wind up in a bloody fight. We all know that. The fight's coming.
The Oath Keepers began planning to block the peaceful transfer of power shortly after the November 3rd election. And according to the Department of Justice, Stuart Rhodes, the Oath Keepers leader, said to his followers that we were not going to get through this without a civil war. In response to the December 19th, 2020 tweet by President Trump, the Oath Keepers focused on January 6th in Washington, D.C. In response to the tweet, one member, the president of the Florida chapter, put on social media, "The president called us to the Capitol. He wants us to make it wild." The goal was for the Oath Keepers to be called to duty so that they could keep the president in power, although President Trump had just lost the election. The committee learned that the Oath Keepers set up quick reaction forces outside of the city in Virginia where they stored arms. The goal of these quick reaction forces was to be on standby just in case President Trump invoked the Insurrection Act.
Did the Oath Keepers ever provide weapons to members?
I'm going to decline to answer that and put them in grounds for due process grounds.
In footage obtained by the committee, we learned that on the night of January 5th, Enrique Tarrio and Stuart Rhodes met in a parking garage in Washington, D.C.
There's mutual respect there. I think we're fighting the same fight, and I think that.
The committee learned that the Oath Keepers went into the Capitol through the east doors in two stack formations. The DOJ alleges that one of the stacks went into the Capitol looking for Speaker Pelosi, although they never found her. As the attack was unfolding, Mr. Tarrio took credit. In documents obtained by the Department of Justice, Mr. Tarrio said in an encrypted chat, "Make no mistake, and we did this." Later on that evening, Mr. Tarrio even posted a video which seemed to resemble him in front of the Capitol with a black cape. And the title of the video was Premonition. The evidence developed by the Select Committee and the Department of Justice highlights how each group participated on the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. In fact, the investigation revealed that it was individuals associated with the Proud Boys who instigated the initial breach at the Peace Circle at 12:53 p.m. Within 10 minutes, rioters had already filled the Lower West Plaza. 2 o'clock, rioters had reached the doors on the west and the east plazas. And by 2:13, rioters had actually broken through the Senate wing door and got into the Capitol building. A series of breaches followed. At 2:25 p.m., rioters breached the east side doors to the rotunda. And then right after 2:40 p.m., rioters breached the east side doors near the Ways and Means room. Once the rioters infiltrated the Capitol, they moved through the crypt, the rotunda, the hallways leading to the House chambers, and even inside the Senate chambers.
Individuals associated with two violent extremist groups have been charged with seditious conspiracy in connection with the January 6th attack. One is the Oath Keepers. They are a group of armed anti-government extremists. The other group is the Proud Boys. They promote white supremacist beliefs and have engaged in violence with people they view as their political enemies. Members of both groups have already pled guilty to crimes associated with the January 6th attack. As requested as part of the documentary you've been filming, you gain access to the Proud Boys and their leader, Enrique Tarrio. Your crew filmed them in Washington, D.C. on the evening of January 5th and then on January 6th. On the 5th, you were with the head of Mr. Tarrio, Washington, D.C. What happened?
We picked up Mr. Terrio from jail. He'd been arrested for carrying some magazines, some extra capacity magazines, and he took responsibility for the burning of the Black Lives Matter flag that was stolen from the church on December the 12th. We were attempting to get an interview with Mr. Terrio. We had no idea of any of the events that were going to subsequently happen. We drove him to pick up his bags from the property department of the police, which is just south of the mall. We picked up his bags and went to get some other bags from the Phoenix Hotel, where we encountered Mr. Stuart Rhodes from the Oath Keepers. By the time I'd gone to park the car, my colleague was saying, who got into the car with Mr. Terrio, that they had moved to a location around the corner, the parking garage of the Hall of Legends, I believe. And so we quickly drove over there. We drove down into the parking garage and filmed the scene of Mr. Terrio and Mr. Rhodes and certain other individuals in that garage. We then continued to follow Mr. Terrio. There was some discussion about where he was going to go. He ended up going towards a hotel in Baltimore, and we conducted an interview with him in the hotel room. Returned to DC for that night. And what was interesting that night is that was the first indication that DC was much more busy than it had been any other time we'd been here, because we couldn't get into the hotels we wanted to, and we ended up at a hotel that was satisfactory as we would hope.
Thank you. So what you're saying is you filmed the meeting between Mr. Terrio and Oath Keep Rhodes, right?
Indeed.
You could what was said, but according to the Justice Department indictment of Mr. Terrio, a participant referenced the Capitol. Now, on the morning of January 6th, you learned the Proud Boys would gather near the rally scheduled to take place near the White House. What time did you meet up with the Proud Boys, and what was happening when they met?
We met up with the Proud Boys somewhere around 10:30 a.m. and they were starting to walk down the mall in easterly direction towards the Capitol. There was a large contingent, more than I had expected. And I was confused to a certain extent why we were walking away from the president's speech, because that's what I felt we were there to cover.
So at 10:30 a.m., that's early in the day. That's even before President Trump had started speaking. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
So how many Proud Boys would you estimate were marching together to the Capitol?
A couple of hundred, potentially. Yeah, I'd say a couple of hundred Proud Boys were marching towards the Capitol at that point.
At the time, was the area heavily guarded?
No, that was, I remember we walked down the mall, we walked to the right of the reflecting pool, and then north along the road that leads to the Peace Circle. And as we were walking past the Peace Circle, I framed the Proud Boys to the right of my shot with the Capitol behind, and we see one sole police officer at the barriers, which subsequently breached. We then walk up and past a tactical unit preparing, and you see that in the film where the man questions their duty and their honor, and you see maybe a dozen Capitol Police putting on their riot gear.
So how would you describe the atmosphere at that time?
The atmosphere it seemed to be much darker. I make efforts to create familiarity between myself and my subjects to make them feel comfortable. And the atmosphere was much darker this day than had been in these other days. And there was also a contingent of Proud Boys that I hadn't met before from Arizona who appeared to wear these orange hats and had orange armbands.
So when the Proud Boys went back down the hill to the Peace Circle, did a larger crowd start together?
Well, no, first of all, we went round to the back and down the steps, and we took some photographs on the east side of the Capitol, and then we went for lunch. We went for tacos.
So, Mr. Preston, you're a journalist, so you are careful to stick to things that you have observed. But what you've told us is highly relevant. Let me highlight a few key facts others have provided the committee. A large group of Proud Boys present at the Capitol. We know that from multiple sources. You now estimate that there were around 250 to 300 individuals that you've testified. They weren't there for President Trump's speech. We know this because they left that area to march toward the Capitol. Speech began. They walked around the Capitol that morning. I'm concerned this allowed them to see what defenses were in place and where weaknesses might be. And they decided to launch their attack at the Peace Circle, which is the front door of the Capitol complex. It's the first security perimeter that those marching from the ellipse would have to come to as they move toward the Capitol. The Peace Circle walkway was always where the thousands of angry Trump supporters would arrive after President Trump sent them from the lips. The Proud Boys timed their attack to the moments before the start of the joint session in the Capitol, which is also where President Trump directed angry mob, quote, "We fight like hell," end quote. He told them before sending them down Pennsylvania Avenue, right to where the Proud Boys gathered and where you were filming. Now, a central question is whether the attack on the Capitol was coordinated and planned. What you witnessed is what a coordinated and planned effort would look like. It was the culmination of a months-long effort spearheaded by President Trump. Ms. Quested, thank you for your eyewitness account of the lead up to the breach of the Peace Circle. This brings us to a point in time where you and Officer Edwards were in close proximity. At this point, I reserve the balance of my time pursuant to 5C, Section 8 of House Resolution 503. The chair recognizes the young woman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, for questioning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Officer Edwards, I want to start by thanking you for your service and thank you for your courage. Thank you for being here this evening. I know that it's not easy to relive what happened for you and for the officers behind you and for the family members of officers in the audience this evening. But it's really important for the country to have a full accounting and understand what happened. I want to start, Officer Edwards, with a short clip that shows the horrible moment when you were injured as the Peace Circle was breached. Officer Edwards, can you describe the crowd that had assembled at the Peace Circle as you and your fellow officers stood behind and guarded the bike racks at the Peace Circle?
Yes, so there were about, I want to say about 5 of us on that line. And there was our bike rack, and then at the bottom of the Pennsylvania Avenue walkway, right by Peace Circle, there was another bike rack. And so the crowd had kind of gathered there. It was the crowd led by Joseph Biggs, and mostly in civilian clothes. There were some who had military fatigues on. We could see people with bulletproof vests on, things like that. They didn't seem, extremely cohesive, gathered there in their outfits, but they had gathered there together, and Joseph Biggs started. He had a megaphone, and he started talking about, first it was things kind of relating to Congress, and then the tables started turning once the, what is now the Arizona group is what you said, the crowd with orange hats, they came up chanting F-U-C-K, Antifa, and they joined that group. And once they joined that group, Joseph Biggs' rhetoric turned to the Capitol Police. He started asking us questions like, you didn't miss a paycheck during the pandemic. Mentioning stuff about our pay scale was mentioned. And started turning the tables on us. And I've worked, I can, conservatively say probably hundreds of civil disturbance events. I know when I'm being turned into a villain, and that's when I turned to my sergeant and I stated the understatement of the century. I said, Sarge, I think we're going to need a few more people down here. And so after that, I think they started conferring. They went a little silent. They started conferring among each other. I saw the person now identified as Ryan Samsel. He put his arm around Joseph Biggs, and they were talking. And then they started approaching the first barricade. They ripped the first barricade down, and they approached our bike racks. At that time, we started holding on, grabbing the bike racks. There weren't many of us, so I grabbed the middle between 2 different bike racks. And, I wasn't under any pretense that I could hold it for very long, but I just wanted to, make sure that we could get more people down and get our CDU units time to answer the call. So we started grappling over the bike racks. I felt the bike rack come on top of my head, and I was pushed backwards, and my foot caught the stair behind me, and my chin hit the handrail, and then at that point I had blacked out, but my back of my head clipped the concrete stairs behind me.
And you were knocked unconscious, is that right, Officer Edwards?
Yes, ma'am.
But then when you regained consciousness, even with the injuries, you returned to duty, is that right?
Yes, ma'am. At that time, adrenaline kicked in. I ran towards the West Front, and I tried to hold the line at the Senate steps at the Lower West Terrace. More people kept coming at us. It just seemed like, more and more people started, coming onto the West Front. They started overpowering us. And that was right about when MPD's officers showed up. Their bike officers pushed the crowd back and allowed our CDU units as well as theirs to form that line that you see, that very thin line between us and the protesters or the rioters, you know, at that time. I fell behind that line, and for a while I started decontaminating people who had gotten sprayed, and treating people medically who needed it.
And then you were injured again there on the West Terrace, is that right, Officer Edwards?
Yes, ma'am. So after a while, I got back on the line. It was on the house side of the Lower West Terrace. And I was holding that line for a while. There weren't many of us over there. And Officer Sicknick was behind me for most of the time, for about 30 to 45 minutes that I was down there. We were just, as the best we could, we were just, you know, grappling over bike racks and trying to hold them as quick as possible. All of a sudden, I see movement to the left of me, and I turned, and it was Officer Sicknick with his head in his hands. And he was pale, which I figured at that point that he had been sprayed, and I was concerned. My, you know, cop alarm bells went off, because if sprayed with pepper spray, you're going to turn red. He turned just about as pale as this sheet of paper. And so I looked back to see what had hit him, what had happened, and that's when I got sprayed in the eyes as well. I was taken to be decontaminated by another officer, but we didn't get the chance because we were then tear gassed.
And we are going to play just a brief clip of that moment that you've just described, Officer Edwards.
You see it too.
Officer Edwards, I just want to thank you for being here. And I know, again, how difficult it is. I know the family of Officer Sicknick as well, who's here tonight. One of the things a police officer said to me recently was, as members of Congress, all of us understood that January 6th, when we waited from the chamber, were led to a safe underlocation, whether we knew that so many of you rushed out of the building and into the fight. And I can assure you that we do know that, and that we understand your services. Thank you for your continued work with our committee and the interviews, and thank you, both of you, for being here this evening. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Ms. Edwards, can you give us one memory of that awful day that stands out most vividly in your mind?
I can. That time when I talked about falling behind MPD's line, I remember because I had been kind of shielded away because I was holding those stairs. So I wasn't able to really see what was going on over here. When I fell behind that line and I can just remember my breath catching in my throat. because what I saw was just a war scene. It was something like I'd seen out of the movies. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were officers on the ground, you know, they were bleeding, they were throwing up, they were, you know, they had, I mean, I saw friends with blood all over their faces. I was slipping in people's blood. You know, I was catching people as they fell. It was carnage. It was chaos. I can't even describe what I saw. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that as a police officer, as a law enforcement officer, I would find myself in the middle of a battle. You know, I'm trained to detain, you know, a couple of subjects and handle a crowd, but I'm not combat trained. And that day, it was just hours of hand-to-hand combat, hours of dealing with things that were way beyond any law enforcement officer has ever trained for. And I just remember that moment of stepping behind the line and just seeing the absolute war zone that the West Front had become.
Let me thank you for your service and obviously your bravery that you have told the world about tonight. It's unfortunate that you had to defend the Capitol from fellow Americans. None of us would ever think that that would have to happen, but it did. So let me thank our witnesses for joining us tonight and sharing their experiences with America. Throughout my chairmanship of this committee, I've continuously vowed that this committee will ensure a comprehension of the heroic acts of January 6th, and that we will act wherever they lead. Your testimony is an essential part of that record and helps us do our job. Mr. Quested, thank you for sharing your footage and your account of the day's events with us. The images you recorded and have shared with the committee do a better job than any of our words in reinforcing the violence of January 6th. We hope that the power of your footage helped encourage all Americans to consider how citizens with so much in common could viciously brawl at the seat of their democratic government. Officer Edwards, thank you for your brave service, as I indicated, on January 6th, and all you did to protect us, and most importantly, our democracy. If you and your fellow officers hadn't held the line against those violent insurrectionists, we can only imagine the disaster that would have ensued. Your heroism in the face of danger is admirable, and your will to continue to protect and serve despite your serious injuries should be an inspiration to all of us. We wish you a continued recovery and look forward to seeing you back in uniform sometime soon. The members of the Select Committee may have additional questions for tonight's witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Without objections, members will be permitted 10 business days to submit statements for the record, including opening remarks and additional questions for the witnesses. The witnesses have just told us what they heard the rioters saying while they stormed the Capitol on that day. Now we're going to hear it from the rioters themselves. Without objection, I include in the record a video presentation.
what really made me want to come was the fact that, you know, I had supported Trump all that time. I did believe, you know, that the election was being stolen. And Trump asked us to come.
He personally asked for us to come to DC that day. And I thought, for everything he's done for us, if this is the only thing he's going to ask of me, I'll do it.
We're gonna walk down to the Capitol.
Did you recall President Trump mentioning going to the Capitol during his speech?
Oh, yeah. So that's one of my disappointments. He said he was going to go with us, that he was going to be there.
I know why I was there, and that's because he called me there and he laid out what is happening in our government. He laid it out.
But I remember Donald Trump telling people to be there, right? I mean, to support. So you mentioned that the president asked you. Do you remember a specific message?
Basically, yeah, he asked for us to come to DC, that big things are gonna happen.
What got me interested, he said, I have something very important to say on January 6th or something like that. Is what got me interested to be there.
You know, Trump has only asked me for two things. He asked me for my vote, and he asked me to come on January 6th.
When the committee reconvenes next week, we're going to examine the lies that convinced those men and others to storm the Capitol, to try to stop the transfer of power. We're going to take a close look at the first part of Trump's attack on the rule of law, when he hit the fuse that ultimately resulted in the violence of January 6th. Without objection, with that, the committee stands adjourned.
We have been watching and listening to close to 2 hours of testimony